Recently, I went back and revisited Sonic Colors Ultimate, which is a 2021 remaster of the original game that was originally released in 2010. I'm a huge fan of Sonic the Hedgehog, and it was nice to revisit Sonic Colors again because the first time I played it was the Ultimate Edition. This game was originally released on the Nintendo Wii, and there was also a DS port. We started off with story. In terms of story, it's the usual stuff. Robotnik wants to take over the world, he's all evil, and Sonic and Tails must get in his way. This time, Robotnik has built a big giant space amusement park, and Robotnik tries to kidnap the Wisps so he can harvest their power to take over the entire universe. Naturally, Sonic and Tails work together to try to rescue the Wisps, and as a result, they befriend the Wisps and they allow Sonic and Tails to use their powers to take down Robotnik, and in the end, Sonic and Tails take down Robotnik and free the Wisps from their captivity, and that's about it in terms of story. Typical Sonic stuff, there's really not much to it. And if I'm not mistaken, this was the first game to feature Roger Craig Smith as the voice of Sonic. This game has 7 different planets for you to play through, and each planet is split into 6 acts. 5 regular acts and then a boss act, but we'll get into sort of the structure of the acts or planets a little bit later. From a gameplay perspective, you gotta go fast. That's the main goal of Sonic games. So, there's a homing attack, which is just performed by pressing X. You can use this to defeat enemies, or to jump onto platforming sections, or even bounce off of bumpers. And the homing attack is what you're going to be doing most of the time. Of course, you move with the left stick, and you can even collect white wisps, which give Sonic boosting abilities. And whenever Sonic boosts, he gains a large amount of speed, and he can even become invulnerable to enemies, causing him to become basically an indestructible projectile. You also have some sections where you just repeatedly mash a button to continue jumping. Those sections are automated. If you mash them, you'll succeed every time. But sometimes you're going to be on rails, literally in some instances. But this game does feel pretty automated. From time to time, you will be on automated running sections where Sonic can move back and forth in between different lanes. Sonic basically is immune here if you just spam left and right. And there are even some sections in Terminal Velocity, which is the final act, in which you are just kind of back and forth moving between lanes. And then, once you reach the finish, you are given a grade and a score. And the rank can be anywhere between a D rank to an S rank, obviously S being the best. So there really is a big incentive to get as many points as you can to get a high rank. To get 100%, you do have to maximize your ranks in this game. But one change that was made to the Ultimate Edition is the lives system. In the original game, whenever Sonic died and had to respawn at a checkpoint, he would lose a life. However, in this game, instead, Tails would just simply pick you up and drop you off at the checkpoint. This does make the game a little bit easier. Now, each level does have some platforming sections. It isn't just run as fast as you can. Sometimes you will have to slow down and just kind of take your time with it. This game does also feature 2 different types of collectibles. There's the red rings, which is important for Super Sonic, and then the park tokens, which can be used to unlock cosmetic items for Sonic. One thing I did like about the level designs of this game is how they just kind of dynamically change between the automated lanes to the regular open-ended sections. Of course, this is a linear game. Your goal is to get from point A to point B, but I always thought that that was really sweet how it just naturally transitions, or seamlessly, I should say. There were some points in which the platforming just wasn't that exciting. Like sometimes the platforms are just moving so slow that there really is no challenge whatsoever, such as this section on Sweet Mountain, and it just slowed the game down to a crawl a lot. But apart from that, I think that this game, in terms of the platforming and just the general gameplay, it is very fun, but it's not much to write home about. But what makes this game the most interesting are the wisps. And the wisps make this game very exciting, especially when it comes to replaying levels, because the wisps allow you to discover completely new areas, allow you to discover new shortcuts, and we'll talk about the wisps. We already have the white wisps, which just allows Sonic to boost, gives him a lot of speed, and he becomes invulnerable to enemies, and you can completely just crash right through them. Then you have the cyan wisps, or the cyan. The cyan wisps allow Sonic to turn into basically a laser. These are really cool because you can not only take down enemies, but you can also go into these cyan gates, and Sonic can zip through some of the levels. It's pretty interesting. And then, of course, all the wisps can help you take down a lot of the enemies. Then you have the yellow wisp, which is a drill, which allows Sonic to drill into the ground and even take down other enemies down there. The drill is really cool because it allows you to discover hidden areas or discover brand new shortcuts that previously wouldn't have been there. So these wisps do allow you to play levels in different ways, such as finding new shortcuts because of the drill. Then you have the orange wisps, which are basically rockets that shoot Sonic into the air, and these are probably the least useful of all the wisps, but it can help you to get more rings, I guess, which do help to add on to your total score for the ranking towards the end of each level. But the rocket wisp was kind of cool, I guess. Maybe you can discover new top routes. Then there's the blue wisps, which allow you to transform these blue blocks into blue rings, which can be collected. Of course, these wisps don't make you entirely immune from enemies, but using the blue wisp, you can also break blocks and even defeat enemies with it, and these can open up new paths and all that stuff. But then we get into the pink wisp, which is a spike. And the pink wisp allows you to stick to walls and get a boost and to move really fast. Like the other wisps, you can discover brand new areas, you can discover new shortcuts, and these can also be used to take down enemies as well. All the wisps more or less function the same in terms of enemies and stuff like that, not to repeat myself or anything. Then you have the green wisp, which is a ghost wisp, and once again, you can use this to defeat enemies, but you can also follow a ring trail, just like that. And I think that's the coolest part of the ghost wisp. You can also use this to just kind of hover around. And then you have the purple wisp, which allows Sonic to turn into this big beast that gets bigger with each block and enemy consumed. This one was definitely the coolest because Sonic just kind of goes on a little bit of a rampage as long as the wisp is still active. Finally, we get into the levels, and Tropical Resort is just really beautiful. I think this level is really fun. Of course, I'm biased because I'm a huge fan of space and space flight and all that stuff. And seeing the Earth from this angle is just really, really nice. And they really want you to know that you're in space right now. Then we have Sweet Mountain. And Sweet Mountain's level designs make it look like it's cakes and sweets and all that stuff. Like you'll have candy cane rails and all that stuff. And you have like cheeseburgers, just any food item you can think of, but mostly sweets. I thought this one was kind of cool too in terms of just how it looks. And there's the candy cane rails that Sonic can just skate right on through. I like Sweet Mountain a lot. To tell you the truth, I think every level in this game is really cool. I have one that became my favorite that I initially didn't expect. Then we have Starlight Carnival. I love Starlight Carnival because once again it's in space, there's a lot of flashing lights. I love big neon lights. And this is space, so this is right down my alley in terms of what I find visually appealing. Starlight also has most of the levels take place in an interior as opposed to being outside and in space. But, you know, I love the aesthetics of being outside doing Starlight Carnival. But next up, we have Planet Wisp. And Planet Wisp has a lot of vegetation. It basically just looks like you're on the surface of a planet. There's tons of vegetation around, and these are the Wisp's home planet, as you know. And of course, there's all these platforming sections, which every level, granted, has. But this one, honestly, isn't my favorite in terms of design. I mean, don't get me wrong, it still looks really nice, but I'm more of a fan of the more space ones. But I do like seeing that big other planet in the distance. Maybe that's a giant moon. And then we have like these purple oceans, which I also found to be interesting. Speaking of oceans, we have Aquarium Park, which ended up being my favorite level in the game in terms of just design. Typically, I'm not a big fan of water levels in video games, but there was something special about Aquarium Park. I just really liked how this looked. And maybe it was just like the more traditional Japanese architecture in the background, or at least what looks to be traditional Japanese architecture. But I just loved how this looked. This is like, it's very floral, there's a lot of water, obviously, because you're under the water. This one just looks great. I love just how this level looks. It's absolutely my favorite in terms of design. Getting back into the space levels, we have Asteroid Coaster. Asteroid Coaster is a roller coaster, but from the remnants of asteroids. But there are interiors. I hope you like the color green, because you're going to see it a lot, like with this green fluid, almost kind of like green lava, if that makes sense. I thought that Asteroid Coaster did have really interesting designs, though, because it's sort of like you build an amusement park just out of the a big roller coaster just out of the remnants of a planet. And there are even some upside down platforming sections where the gravity changes. I thought that was really nice. And then you get into the final area, which is Terminal Velocity. Terminal Velocity is really the shortest act in the game, as it serves as just kind of the final boss area. So there's really not much to say about it because it's so short. At the end of every planet is Act 7, which is basically a boss fight. This game does have a good variety of bosses, but honestly, I really didn't find the bosses that interesting. This is my favorite boss, where it's like a big giant wheel that you have to kind of roll around and hit the boss whenever you can. That one was always my favorite one. But for the most part, the bosses just throw out a pattern of like 3 or 4 moves at the same time, and you have to hit them whenever you can. I liked the boss fights in this game, but honestly, they just were not that interesting to me. So, there are some bosses that are on rails, such as this one, where you can follow sort of 3 different paths at the same time, but Sonic is always moving, and you basically dodge the attacks and then move in to attack whenever you can. Speaking of sort of bosses, you have the Rival Rush modes, in which Sonic gets to race against Metal Sonic. And these are essentially just races. Every planet has one act that you have the ability to race Metal Sonic, and your goal is to just finish the level within a certain amount of time. Of course, Metal Sonic is running with you, but you just have to beat it under a certain time. These are kind of like speed run challenges. Metal Sonic will have the same time every time, so there really isn't like a luck kind of scenario. It's just pure skill. So every planet has one Metal Sonic race, and then you have Game Land, which is probably one of the more interesting things you can do in this game. Game Land is unlocked by collecting the red rings. To unlock every level in Game Land, you must collect all the red rings, but there is a big bonus that you do get by completing all the levels in Sonic Simulator. You get the Chaos Emeralds. We'll get to that a little bit later. The Sonic Simulator levels are basically sort of like 2D Sonic games where you go through and there's platforming sections, you take down enemies. It's the usual stuff in terms of 2D Sonic. But the completion reward are Chaos Emeralds, and those Chaos Emeralds are used to unlock Super Sonic. And you can cycle between Super Sonic in the menu, basically you toggle between them. And once you collect 50 rings, you can tap R1 to become Super Sonic. There are advantages and disadvantages to using Super Sonic, like obviously you're impervious to damage, you don't take damage whatsoever. You jump higher and you have unlimited boost, but the two downsides are you cannot use the wisps whatsoever, meaning that some of the more interesting aspects of the game design are removed, and also you're on a timer, but you can collect more rings to increase the timer. With the park tokens that you collect over the course of the game, you can spend those on customization items in the options satellite. You can change Sonic's gloves, his shoes, his aura, and even the boost color. However, it should be worth noting that these are purely cosmetic and these do not actually affect the gameplay whatsoever, but I do think it's an interesting touch that you have a little bit of customization in regards to how Sonic can look. But if you really want Sonic to have different colored shoes, there you go. Overall, I really enjoyed Sonic Colors Ultimate. I think that the Wisps do add a new depth to the level design because, as I said, you can discover new shortcuts or you can even find 2 to 3 different ways to play through each level. So the Wisps became a mainstay for the Sonic franchise afterwards. But all things considered, this is a pretty solid Sonic game. If I had to assign a rating, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Sonic Colors is a really cool game.